This morning, we're going to continue a series we've been working on as a church. We've been looking at 5 fearless ladies, man, and how they changed the world by being fearless in their faith. We've talked about being fearless and faithful, and that's important. We've talked about being fearless and just thoughtful of those around you. And this morning, we're going to talk about being fearless and generous. The truth is, this morning, we're doing things a lot different. We're going to have a time of ice cream afterward to celebrate all the peanut butter you guys brought. And you brought so much the table started bending, so they had to put it on the floor. That's great. That's awesome. But this morning is just an outgrowth of what the vision for this church has always been. Before this church ever existed, we sat down and we said there are 3 things we want to see in this church. We want to see people who have authentic faith, real faith, where they admit when they have doubt and they admit when they have faith, and they know the difference between the two, and they know that tension that is to be in the world but to believe in another world that is coming. And we also said we want to see a people who come together in community, who love the community around them, but also serve together in the community of the church. And then our third key element was we wanted to be a place filled with radical generosity. And this morning, you guys have been radically generous. I know it may not seem like much, but that peanut butter is going to go a long way. About 25 years ago, my mom and I were in line at a food bank, because that's what it took for us to get by. She was a single mom. It was very tight. She wouldn't tell you this, and she's probably glad she's not here this morning, but our budget was within $2.37 each month of going broke. That if her paycheck came in just right and everything went right and our gas bill was what it could be, that's what it took for us to make it. And we wouldn't have been fed during certain seasons of my childhood without the food bank. So somewhere out there, there's another kid, unfortunately, like Mark Nepple, who needs food. And this morning, you guys are making that possible. So thank you. And with that in mind, I wanted to look at a lady in the New Testament who was known for her generosity. So this morning, we're going to talk about being fearless and generous. And I want to talk about those 2 things, because it does take a little bit of courage to be generous. Do you know what I mean? Because here's what we hear from the world around us. You need to save, you need to put away, and you need to worry about you. They can fend for themselves. They can take care of their own needs. And what you need to do is you need to look out for you and yours. And that is the mindset of many people in our world. But Christ has called us to a different mindset. A mindset of generosity. Not just radical throwing away all things and not caring about our family. No, taking care of our own, but also taking care of those around us. And the proximity of the need to us is how responsible we are for that need. If there is a need next door, I'd better be willing to take care of it. I'd better be willing to take care of those in my family, my extended family, and those needs that I see. And we as a church, we try to take care first of our community here in Portsmouth, whether it's with the food bank or other nonprofits or whatever we can do with serving our man hours. And after that, we do try to be involved around the country and especially around the world in third world nations where there is poverty. But we've got to understand that if God has called us as believers, not only to faith, but to generosity and to serving. And so this lady, man, she had all those things. Would you read with me in Acts chapter 9? If you don't have your Bible, it'll be up on the screen, but I'll be reading from Acts chapter 9. At Joppa, there was a certain disciple named Tabitha. You do understand that disciples weren't just dudes, right? You understand there were a lot of followers of Christ who were women. We've said this every week, but were it not for the women who supported the ministry of Jesus, those 12 guys never would have gotten to do the ministry with Jesus. It was mainly supported by women like this lady, Tabitha, which is translated Dorcas. Now, if I was Tabitha, I would much prefer you call me Tabitha and not Dorcas. But I have met a lady named Dorcas before, and I just thought, your parents, boy, they are cruel. All right, read on. This woman was full of good works and charitable deeds, which she did. Now, I want you to think about this. This is the only time we have mentioned this lady here. If you were mentioned in the Bible, if your life were written down in a historical book, if your life were recorded in one blurb, one blog, one paragraph, what would be said about this life you've lived? And notice how she was generous, with not just good works, but charitable deeds. But it happened in those days that she became sick, and she died. And when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. I want to explain to you what that word wash means. Long time ago, thousands of years ago, when somebody would pass away, they wanted to do everything possible to make sure they were actually dead and they weren't going to bury them and them not turn out to be dead. That happened a lot through human history. And so what they would do is they would wash a body with warm water, because if there was any chance at resuscitation or reviving, warm water could do it. That was the most trustworthy means they had back then before the modern medicine that we have today. So they washed her in the hopes that it was just a very, very bad coma or a very, very bad illness she had, and she didn't come to. And so they prepared her body to be buried. And here's what I want you to get. There was a movement inside her community, not just inside her church. When somebody passes away, we all miss them. In our church, usually, we grieve together. But there was a movement in her community that said, no, she can't be dead. We will not let her be dead. She has to live on, because this community cannot survive without her. And I would ask you, if you were to leave this earth tomorrow, would your community miss you? Would your close-knit community, much less the entire community? Joppa's not a big town at this point. It's a town that lives on the coast, a lot like Portsmouth. They had a lot of shipping that came through. And as a result, there weren't a lot of highbrow jobs in that city. It was a very poor city. And there were a lot of widows in that town. And we're going to find out later as we read on that what she did with her hands, she wasn't a very wealthy woman herself. What she did with her hands was she made clothes for people who could not afford to buy clothes. She made garments. She made all kinds of things for people who could not afford to buy them. She couldn't afford to just buy them for them, so she would make them with her hands. And when she passed off the scene, yes, the church hurt. We need that lady of faith. Yes, people wanted to have the friendship, but they needed her generosity because she was holding the community together. And here's what's crazy. The community of believers and non-believers started saying, this will not do. We cannot have this. We need to call Peter. Now, to this point, there were a lot of crazy things happening in the early church, and I've explained this to you before, that God worked miracles in the early church, and God worked miracles through people in the New Testament because they had come to the ends of their means. There was no physical way for something to happen. There was no financial way for something to happen, and so God would step in and multiply their resources through a miracle or some way. And in this case, they tried everything physical they could. They washed her. They prayed over her. And I want to be careful. Every time someone passes away, we don't need to put their body out and pray that God revives them. This was something that happened one time. You understand that God did the burning bush thing one time with this dude named Moses. One time and it was done. Okay? He don't do that. You see a bush on fire? Run. All right? Put it out with a fire hose, but don't start talking to it. God's not going to do that again. God parted the Red Sea one time. Okay? One time. God's not into duplicates. Okay? He's too creative for that. It'd be like telling an artist, hey, I really like that. Can you do that again? No, I'm moving on to something new. God's always doing new things, but he was going to do something special here. So read on. Read Acts chapter 9, read verse 38. And since Lydda was near Joppa, and the disciples had heard that Peter was there, they sent 2 men to him, imploring him not to delay in coming to them. And Peter arose and went with them. And when he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by him weeping, showing the tunics and the garments which Dorcas, Tabitha, had made while she was with them. Now, I don't know about you, but I do have a favorite jacket. Maybe you do too. Maybe a favorite pair of clothes. But we don't really think too much about clothes, and we shouldn't. But to these widows, this was something special that someone close to them had made. The truth is, my wife and I, we have a quilt at our home that a friend of ours named Tabitha, her and her sister Tanya, they're quilters. I know it wasn't a cool thing. They were teenagers, and they quilted us a quilt when we got married. We like that quilt. It's something special. It's not something we picked up at the store. It's something somebody made for us. When these widows came to talk to Peter, they wanted to show him what she had done. There was evidence that she had lived a life not just for herself, but for the community around her and for those people in greatest need. And here's what I want you to understand. Tabitha could not fix the world she lived in, okay? There was poverty, there was slavery, there was hate, there was fear-mongering, there was all kinds of evil in the world she lived in. But do you know what she could do? She could make a difference to one set of people close to her. And here's our problem. I was talking with some friends of mine this morning when they came into church. They said, Mark, I watched this documentary last night, and it was on injustice, and it just got me all kinds of fired up. And I said, me too, man. That's what happens. I get on Twitter, and I start reading about what's going on. I get all fired up about the injustices around the world and how people are kept down and the marginalized are not taken care of. And I get so frustrated, and I said, and you know why it's so frustrating? Because I can't fix the world tomorrow, and neither can you. And Tabitha knew that, but you know what she could do? Hear me. She could sew a tunic for that widow. She could put together some clothing for this widow. She could take care of the least of these in her community. She could not fix Jerusalem, that big town down the road, 45 miles away. No, she couldn't do that, but she could make a difference here. The truth is, we as the church have taken it upon ourselves to fix the world when we're not interested in fixing the community around us. We've taken it upon ourselves to try to address politics, and we want to address poverty all around our churches, and this is not how it should be. We have been called not to fix the world from the top down, but to serve the world from the bottom up. To love the least of these, the marginalized, the people that are often overlooked. And I will remind you that widows were overlooked during this period of human history. If you were a woman 2,000 years ago, you did not have rights. If you were a widow, you did not have a source of income because only men for the majority of the jobs had jobs. And so if your husband passed away, you were out of luck, sister, and no one was there to take care of you. And do you know who stepped in and started taking care of widows in an incredible way? The early church. So much so, that the early Roman emperors began writing about the way that they took care of these widows. And at one point, 300 years in, they said, if we could just get our Roman temples to take care of people the way they do, we could get rid of them. But the problem is, they not only take care of their own, they take care of our own for us. That's what we, the church, are called to do. We are called to serve the least of these. If there are people living marginalized lives, we are to step in and defend them. God had much to say in the book of Isaiah for his Hebrew people if they were ever to allow people to be marginalized and not step in and defend them. God would have something much harsher to say to the New Testament church if we would allow the same thing to happen here. Now, I hear you. Mark, there's only so much we can do. You're right. And that's why it's important that we focus on one thing. And this year, we've, as a church, listen, we're not going to change the world tomorrow, but we've partnered with the food bank primarily this year. And so we're giving a lot of money to them. We're giving them a lot of man hours, and we're giving them a lot of peanut butter today. Is it going to change Portsmouth tomorrow? No. But it's something we can do in a small way to make a difference right where we are. So let me ask you a simple question. Tabitha died. She passed away. Her life was over, and her community would not stand for it. They said, we need her. We need her generosity. We need her love. We need her grace. If your life were taken from you, what would be said about you? That's question number one. And ponder on that, chew on that. And I'm going to let it get quiet so you can think about it and it gets a little uncomfortable. All right, that's uncomfortable. All right. So, but then the next question is this. Let me flip it. Not what would you want them to say, not what would they say, but now let me ask you, what would you want them to say? What do you want to be said about you? Because let me just be real and let's just talk about how we live. Most of us live a life that maybe we would never say this, but this is what our life says about us. I want people to say that I had the best things. I want people to say that I had a nice home. Nothing wrong with having good things. Nothing wrong with having a nice home. Nothing wrong with taking care of your family. But hear me, that's what everyone on this world does. That's what everybody you run into does. Whether believer or non-believer, that's human nature to take care of yourself. So I'd ask you again, what would you want to be said about you? Third question. What can you do today to start changing from what they would say to what you want them to say about you? We have it in our mind that, well, I guess I'd have to change the world. No, you wouldn't. You just have to start changing how you live in this world, starting today. It has to be an attitude shift that comes from within, not from without. If you think signing up to go serve at the food bank is going to change your heart, it's not how it works. It's got to come from within. There has to be a decision in your heart where you say, I don't just exist for me. I don't just exist for me and my family. That's also natural. I exist to make a difference in this world. And I may not always understand what that difference is, but I'm going to pick a group. And here's my encouragement to you. Don't miss this. Some of you have a way of identifying with one group of people and hurting with them and empathizing with them. Don't miss that. That's not just a fleeting thing. That could be the Holy Spirit. That could be God himself saying, that's who I want you to identify with. Because the truth is, this morning, we cannot fix every problem. But Tabitha identified with one group of people, and she said, how can I serve them? I'm not a wealthy woman. I'll sew. Could it be any simpler of a way to fix the problems around her? So let me ask you, who are the people in our society that are marginalized that you most identify with? Who are the people that are hurting? Maybe they're not marginalized. Maybe they're just hurting that you most identify with. And what can you do to make a difference? And now here's the best part. If we end there, this morning, all we've really had is a fundraiser where I encourage you to be good people. And that is not my goal. Because doing good works to feel good about ourselves only lasts as long as that good feeling lasts. And that is not my encouragement this morning. I don't want you to do good to make yourself feel better. I want you to see why Tabitha did good and what happened next. So keep reading in verse 40. But Peter put them all out and knelt down and prayed. And turning to the body, he said, Tabitha, arise. And she opened her eyes. And when she saw Peter, she sat up. Then he gave her his hand and lifted her up, and when she had called the saints and widows, he presented her alive, and it became known throughout all Joppa. And notice the next words, and many believed on the Lord. This was never about Tabitha. Do you understand? Tabitha had already passed. Do you know where she was? She was in eternity. She was in heaven with Jesus. She did not want to come back. But do you know why she was revived? Not so she could live another 20 years, so that many would believe. And here's the thing. Some of you are sitting here and you're thinking, that's crazy. I don't believe that. But you believe Jesus rose from the dead. Oh, yeah, I do. Just don't believe she did. All right, you wrestle with that on your own, okay? Here's what we need to understand. We serve this God we believe raised his son from the dead, who he put on a cross to pay for our sins. But we don't believe he could use us to make a difference in our community. What kind of faith is that? That's not faith. That's not even rationalism. That's stupidity. Like, you can make a difference, and God can use you to make a difference. But here's what I want you to understand. Why are we going about making a difference? Is it our goal to just bring everyone in Portsmouth out of poverty just to say we did it? No. It is our goal to see people restored to new life in Jesus Christ. And the best way, here's why the New Testament church grew. It wasn't because they had a great visitation program, incredible marketing, and follow-up emails. They didn't have any of that. Do you know what they had? They had generosity. And for the first time, these Romans, these Gentiles, these people from all walks of life said, what is different about these people that they don't seem to live for themselves? They seem to live for people that none of us care about. Widows we would walk right by, wouldn't care about. People we would never walk into our home. And they love them, though they've never known them. Let me tell you something, Christian. If that can't be said about you, your faith is weak, your Christian walk is light, and you don't know what the New Testament's all about, okay? We want to do evangelism without serving, and it doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. We want people to believe in a Jesus we've never shown them about. Oh, we can tell them about him. We love to sit around and argue about theology and tell people why they're wrong, but we would never show them Jesus with our actions. And that's why we've lost our credibility as the New Testament church right now in 2016. You want people to believe what you say? Show them. Don't tell them. You want people to believe that your God is real? Show them your God can use you to do more than talk. He can use you to make a difference and walk the walk. So let me ask you, what is it that you can do in your community? Peanut butter, that's going to make a little difference, a little dent this morning. But I'm just going to be real with you. I think that's just the start of what we as a church can do. I believe we could do much more than that. I believe we could make a real impact in our community, not so that we get any credit, because it was never about Tabitha. Not so that people would know our name, because that's not what happened. Do you know who people believed in after that? Jesus. 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 That's what it's about. That's what I'm for. And if you have the intention of coming in and just serving and feel good, I'm telling you, you're going to miss it. Because some days you're not going to feel like serving, you know what I mean? But do you know why Tabitha served this marginalized group of people? Because years before, she had heard the story of God sending his son to identify not with the greatest, but the least. Jesus was not born into wealth. He was born to a carpenter's son in poverty. God has never identified with wealth. And that's what makes Jesus different from every other deity and entity that has supposedly come down to this earth. Jesus identified with the least, the regular man, the regular woman, because it was not about power or wealth or success. It was about faith. It was about believing. And that is why Tabitha served. She said, these widows, they need Jesus. And I'm not just going to tell them they need Jesus because they also need clothes. So I'm going to give them the clothes they need while I tell them about Jesus. And I'm going to tell you something. If you're taking care of somebody and making something for them, they're going to listen to whatever you have to say. All right, Tabitha. Good. Yeah, come on. They're going to listen. If the church wants people to pay attention, if the church wants to get back its credibility, then we've got to get back to serving. That's it. Because that's where we've dropped the ball. We're not going to fix it tomorrow. But this is where we're moving and this is where we're heading. So here's my encouragement. Go home today. Ask yourself, who do I identify with? Who are the people in my study that I can help the most? How can I go about doing that? And what will be said about me? Will it be said that I made a difference, or will it be said that I lived a life that was all about me? This morning, I'm going to close with what that passage closed with. We're talking about fearless, but it's not about fear. We're talking about generosity, but it's not even about that. It all starts and ends with Jesus. Do you know why I have to look at my life as not my own? And I have to be willing to be generous? Because nothing I have is mine. Jesus took on him my shame, my guilt, my fear, so that I could have new life filled with faith and grace and love, true love. So how could I be selfish with what isn't even mine when Jesus has done so much more for me? If you're here this morning, you don't know Jesus, you don't have a relationship with him, I'd encourage you, man, there's nothing greater you'll do. That is the greatest decision you'll ever make. It changed Tabitha's life, and it can change yours too. Would you pray with me?